My name is Jess and this is Reason. Today I'm joined with political commentator and YouTuber Darren Grimes, and we will be discussing the recent announcements of rail strikes along Christmas time. Darren, is Mick Lynch the Grinch who stole Christmas?
It's good to be with you, Jess. I think he actually is, to be honest, because I've had so many people say to me, as you know, I used to work in London. I've got loads of friends in London who are all saying, how the hell am I going to get home, right? I was going to visit my family. How am I going to do that now? And actually, Jess, it's going to snow as well. So can you imagine? The train's already had the perfect excuse to be off work, because you know what it's like. As soon as a bit of snow hits the tracks, that's it for this country. We shut down shop. We say, no way, Jose. Unlike other countries, you look at Scandinavian countries, and they're out there with the snow shovel saying, nowt's a matter, nowt's a bother, and we shut down shop straight away. But no, look, I think actually he's made a massive mistake here, because Mick Lynch, about a month ago, was on the BBC's Newsnight show, and he said that he deliberately wasn't willing to have strike action over Christmas. He didn't want to deny people of Christmas. And if you think about it, that makes perfect sense. We haven't long come out of the lockdown madness, right? We haven't long seen off the last vestiges of the pandemic. And people just want a return to normalcy. They're going through pretty hard times at the minute economically, thanks in large part to that lockdown strategy. So people are saying, I just want to be able to see me family, hug me nearest and dearest close, gather round the turkey, have a good time, have some drinks, all the rest of it. And they're being denied that. And they're being denied that on the charge of, well, actually, an 8% pay increase isn't big enough for train drivers. Now, I don't know about you, Jess, but I actually happen to believe that train drivers are on a pretty penny, right? If you consider that people in the private sector who are being told again that they're not going to get a pay increase, actually they're experiencing a pay freeze, well, they're saying, well, how can it be right that, the taxpayer is expected to say to LNER, for example, which is the East Coast main line, which is owned by the taxpayer, to say, well, we've got to give train drivers more money, but don't think, your man and woman working in the private sector can expect any pay rises. I think that's wrong. I think actually we've got to say, what caused this? And it was the lockdown madness. How do we get out of this? Well, we need to grow the economy. Rishi Sunak's not exactly showing us any, I think, convincing signs that he's got any plan to do that. I think actually him and Jeremy Corbyn look more like con-socialists and conservatives. And I'm just not convinced by this. I think there is an argument, Jess, for nurses. I don't think we're paying nurses enough in this country. But I tell you what, if we stopped net zero, right, if we rolled back that madness, we'd have a pretty penny to give over to people like nurses. And that's what I'd like to see. But that's not going to happen anytime soon. Both the Labour and the Conservative Party are basically applauding each other to see how green they can become. The only thing that's turning green is my skin colour at the actual sight of how much money we're going to burn over this issue.
So what should we do about this situation, about these strikes? Obviously, train drivers aren't the worst hit during this cost of living crisis. Of course, we'd all want a bit more money in our pockets, but I think there's a greater case to be made with nurses, for example. So how should Rishi Sunak go about it, and how do we deal with a situation like this?
I think ultimately the solution has got to be a conservative one, right? It's got to lie in, and dare I say it, this isn't a popular view, but actually, Liz Truss had some of the right answers. It seems mad to say, given that she lasted all of 2 minutes. But the solutions in actually ensuring Britain is a country that grows, ensuring that Britain is a country that has investment, which means that we have higher productivity. Right now, we're an international laggard as far as productivity is concerned. I've just been reading the Telegraph, actually, and there was one comment piece in the business section saying Britain has become far too reliant on basically welfare and assuming that you can get something for nothing, becoming a something for nothing nation, quite lazy. And I thought, well, it's a controversial view, but, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and we're not getting much in the way of eating as far as the economy's concerned. We are lagging behind other like-minded, other similar nations of a similar comparable, size and economy and all the rest of it. And there's got to be reasons for that. We've become a sort of sclerotic EU dirigiste economy, which says, right, well, there's no such thing as too much intervention in the labour market. Government should do more and more. Well, actually, no, because that's not the way you grow the pie, right? That's not the way in which you unleash the ingenuity and I guess, the selfless nature of those who are willing to take risks in the marketplace. That's how you actually get more money into the exchequer. And I don't know about you, but I feel like I pay far too much in the way of tax already. So we need to grow the pie. And I think that would be the solution to actually ensure people get higher wages. I do think there's something to be said for immigration as well, especially for the lower paid. And I know we're going to get onto that, so I'm not going to steal your thunder. But the immigration debate is one where you even had the Bank of England coming out and saying, well, there aren't any real benefits to mass migration to Britain, especially not for the lowest paid, for the least well off, because they're not experiencing investment in retraining, for example, in reskilling, in actually being introduced into the labour market, because businesses and companies don't have any other choice. Right now, or what used to be the case, was they'd have a free-for-all, right? They'd be able to pick and choose who they wanted from the European labour market. An economy of a country, well, that's controversial. Imagine if it was a country, Jess, we'd be up Pooh Creek without a paddle, I tell you that. But a federal system, which it was when we were part of the EU, increasingly so, federalisation was definitely creeping in there. That's why I wanted us out. Thank God we did. But you had 500 million people to choose from. Any of those nations, any of those 28 nations, you could pick and choose from. So business was like the fat cat that got the cream. And it was increasingly becoming a fat cat, but we were getting none of the benefits. So I think all of those things actually are benefits of Brexit. They are benefits of Brexit that we can move away from being an EU model, right? We can become more competitive. But I don't see any sign of that happening anytime. I've got to say, I'm going to sound like the most depressing man in Britain, and it's nearly Christmas, so I can't be that bad. But I do worry that we're not seizing the benefits of Brexit, and actually we're going to end up with the worst of all worlds, which is a sort of Labour Party in charge that says, Keir Starmer, he'll run anything and everything, which will just be a disaster.
Do you think this should serve as a warning sign towards those who advocate for greater state expansion, socialism, nationalisation? After all, when public sector unions go on strike, they're striking against the taxpayer.
If you go back to the 1970s, when British Telecom, BT, was owned by the taxpayer, you then have, and as we're finding at the minute, think of all the jobs that you've just mentioned there, nurses, doctors, ambulance drivers, firefighters, you name it, they're all saying, I'm going on strike, there isn't enough in the national pie to actually pay me a decent wage, I've had enough. And as I say, I think there are laudable arguments to be made that they are right in that. But you look back to BT as an example. In the 1970s, you had to call up BT if you had a phone line. If not, you had to go into, I believe it was your local post office you had to go into and say, I want a phone line installed in my building. Jess, it would take you 6 months. 6 months to have a phone line installed. When the phone line was installed, the wiring was so bad, it wasn't in keeping with the latest tech, right? It wasn't what the United States of America was experiencing, for example, that actually the line would erode. So the line would be rendered useless because of the rain pretty quickly. And the reason for the lack of technology, the lack of investment in the whole network was because it was state-owned. It was in state ownership. And there is only so much of that economic pie that can go into things like telecommunications. Because actually, if you consider all of the things that would be crying out at that time, and the 1970s is a good way of describing what we're currently going through, because that was a moment when we were experiencing basically a general strike. Jess, there were bodies that weren't getting buried, right? There were bin bags lined up on the streets, not being collected. London looked like a sewer. And you consider all of that, and that comes down to the taxpayer, the Chancellor, saying to the taxpayer, well, I'm squeezing you for all I can. I can't get any more money out of the tax take. There isn't the money to put into BT. And then you look at what happened to BT when it was brought into when Margaret Thatcher's government said, right, well, there's no justification for the state owning British Telecom, so we're going to sell it off. And they sold it off. And look at telecommunications now. Look at how many competing businesses there are, how many innovators there are. I'm talking to you now from the northeast of England with 1 gigabyte, right? 1 gigabyte. That's how fast my broadband is. That's incredible. And that's not through BT, it's through a competitor of theirs. And you think of the way in which mobile flourishing happened in this country. None of it through the state sector, all through the private investment. And I think the telecommunications sector is a really, really good example of competition in action, of competition, market competition bearing fruit, because prices are kept low because there is so much competition, and investment is kept higher than it would otherwise be because people want to actually be able to attract more customers. We've got the best of both worlds as far as telecoms is concerned, unlike the horrible picture that we had in the 1970s. But Jess, I'm afraid to say there's no one making that case, right? There's no one making that case. There is a clamour to say, actually, it's private bad, state good, and especially post-COVID, because we had the state run absolutely everything, right? The state was saying, let me wrap you in cotton wool and protect you from cold-like symptoms. Well, we're seeing the repercussions of that in strep A in young people. It's been responsible for loss of far too many young lives. I believe if it's not in double digits, it's almost there, which is horrible. And strep A, when kids actually mix with each other at schools and all the rest of it, they build immunity. Well, kids haven't been doing that because obviously they haven't been able to mix with other kids. And that's, those sort of things, that's absolutely heartbreaking. But without me going on an anti-lockdown rant, I think there has been far too much glorification of what the state can do, when actually, I think if you look at the NHS as one example, and again, this is controversial, the NHS is one example. If you compare us, as you well know, Jess, if you compare us with totally when basically nations like, I'm thinking the Swiss model, the German model, even the French model, Israel's model. These are nations who aren't, too far away from economies of our size, but they're not experiencing the same really poor life outcomes, healthcare outcomes, as we do in the NHS. They're not experiencing the same backlogs. They're not experiencing the same clamour for cancer treatments as we are. Many people are going to die. And that is a direct consequence of the lockdown strategy and the glorification of the NHS in saying that the NHS should do and can do more. I don't think it can. I think the NHS is at breaking point, and I think many, many people are going to die. That's entirely state-run, Jess. I can think of no greater socialist scheme than the National Health Service. And it isn't reaping rewards for the British people. So, yeah, there you are. I've given you the BT and the NHS example. And I think both of those illustrate why actually saying the state should and can do more is dangerous.
Thank you so much to the amazing Darren Grimes for joining me in this video. Make sure to follow his YouTube channel, which he has recently just started posting videos on again. Very exciting stuff coming out. And make sure to follow our YouTube channel, Reasoned. Please like, comment and subscribe, that would help out so much. And stay up to date because we have more videos with Darren coming out, plus a lot of other great content. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Jess Gill and this is Reasoned. Thank you, goodbye.